Hey everyone, thank you for your support. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing you more of the content you love. And be sure to comment down below where you are tuning in from. I didn't realize it at the time, but my life would never be the same after that date. It all started so innocently, nothing like what would come later. The day I met Kate, I thought I was going to have a nice time, maybe even find someone interesting to spend more time with. Little did I know, she was the start of something I wish I'd never walked into. We'd met through a mutual friend, Emily, who had been raving about her for weeks. "Oh, she's charming," Emily had said. "You're gonna love her. She's got this mysterious edge to her, but in a really good way." At the time, it seemed harmless. She sounded like every other girl you hear about on a dating app. Just another charming profile pic, with a message that makes you roll your eyes a bit, but also feel intrigued. But her message wasn't like the others. There was something about the way she phrased things that caught my attention. It wasn't just that she was witty, it was the confidence behind it. She seemed self-assured, almost too much so. After a couple of conversations, we set up a date. She suggested a special night, something a little more unconventional. I'm not one to shy away from new experiences, so when she mentioned this exclusive club that she frequented, I was intrigued. It sounded like something out of a movie, an underground, members-only kind of thing. I didn't know much about it, but that was the appeal. It felt like an adventure, and I wasn't one to pass up an adventure. Plus, Kate seemed normal enough in person. Well, as normal as someone could be who casually dropped phrases like, "I know people who run places you'd never dream of, and I love places where the air smells like power." I laughed it off. I should have listened to the warning bells in my head, but it wasn't until later that I realized how much I'd ignored. The night of the date, Kate picked me up in her car. It was a sleek black vehicle, the kind of car you'd expect someone rich and mysterious to drive. Her smile was easy, but there was something unsettling about how calm and measured she was. As we drove, I could tell that she was nervous, but in a way that seemed controlled, like she was trying to keep her emotions in check, even though there was an undercurrent of excitement in the air. We didn't drive very far, just out of the city, into what looked like the outskirts. It was strange, because for all the opulence Kate spoke of, the club was located in the middle of nowhere, tucked behind tall gates and dense trees. The moment we arrived, a massive black metal door slid open, almost silently, and we pulled inside. I was immediately hit with a strange atmosphere. The place was fancy, yes, but also off. There were old stone walls covered in ivy, low lighting casting long shadows, and a sort of hush that hung in the air. It felt like something out of a horror film. I laughed nervously, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. Kate noticed, of course, and smiled as if to reassure me. "I think you're gonna like it here," she said, guiding me inside. Inside, the club was like nothing I'd ever seen. Plush velvet chairs, polished wood floors, and soft music playing in the background. But something wasn't quite right. The people in the club were all dressed in expensive suits, but their eyes were dark, calculating, watching. Everyone seemed so at ease, like they were all part of some unspoken, shared secret. I didn't think much of it, though. Maybe I was just out of my element. Kate led me to a private booth in the back corner, the kind of booth you wouldn't find in most places. It was elevated, surrounded by thick curtains, and had a perfect view of the entire club. She pulled the seat out for me with an almost exaggerated politeness. I sat down, trying not to let my discomfort show. The more I looked around, the more I felt like I was being watched. The feeling didn't go away. I had a weird sensation of being observed by eyes that weren't friendly, like every gaze was piercing me, making my skin crawl. Kate sat across from me, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "I should have told you," she said, her voice a little lower now, almost like a whisper. "This place isn't like any other club. It's special." She paused, her eyes never leaving mine. "We don't just come here for drinks, you know. You're not the kind of person who'd understand that just by looking at it. But after tonight, you will." I remember laughing it off, trying to cover the uncomfortable feeling that was slowly spreading in my chest. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. Across the room, there were large, gleaming screens mounted to the walls. I thought they were just a part of the decor at first, but they were showing something strange. It looked like a game, a hunt, maybe. Figures were darting through thick woods, and the camera kept switching between them, zooming in on their faces, their desperation. My pulse quickened, my heart starting to race. I must have been staring because Kate noticed, leaning in slightly. You see that? That's the game. Before I could ask what the hell she meant, a bell rang, echoing through the club, and suddenly everyone was standing up. Kate grabbed my wrist lightly, pulling me to my feet. You're part of it now, she said, her tone almost too calm. Part of what? I asked, but the words felt wrong in my mouth. Everything felt wrong. She didn't answer. She just led me to the center of the room. That was when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't alone. There were other people standing around, each of them in the same position, confused, eyes wide. And then I saw it, the moment my heart really sank. They weren't just watching us, they were betting. There were rich men and women, all sitting at tables, all with drinks in hand, staring down at us like we were animals in a cage. And when I looked closer, I saw what was happening on the screens. They weren't just watching us, they were watching a hunt that involved the people in the room, the ones who had been invited like me. It wasn't just a game, it was a bloody, horrific game. I tried to back away, but Kate had a grip on my arm, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was watch as the others around me started to look equally horrified. A man in the corner clapped his hands, and the lights suddenly changed. I don't know how, but the floor beneath me shifted, and I was pushed forward onto a stage. The crowd erupted into applause. Good luck, Kate whispered, her voice colder now, no longer the charming girl I'd met hours earlier. I looked around, my pulse racing. There were no exits. There was no way out. The next few hours felt like an eternity. The hunt wasn't just some metaphor, it was real. The elites in the room bet on us, on who would survive the longest, on who would make it out. There were obstacles, traps, people in the dark corners of the club controlling the game. We were the entertainment, the prey. We had no chance of escape. And the worst part? I realized too late that it wasn't just a game. It was a ritual, a twisted, rich person's version of fun. There was nothing I could do to get out of it. I wasn't supposed to survive. No one ever did. The rich had their games, their bets, their entertainment, and we were the puppets they played with. I don't know how I managed to make it out alive, but I did. I barely escaped, and when I finally made it home, I collapsed in my room, shaking uncontrollably. Kate was gone, her smile still lingering in my mind. I couldn't shake it. I kept hearing the echo of the bell, the laughter from the crowd. They had all been watching, and now I'm just waiting for the next call. Because I know this wasn't the end. The rich always want their entertainment, and I'm just one of the many pawns in their game. It was supposed to be a regular blind date. I was feeling a mix of nerves and excitement, but nothing too out of the ordinary. You know the kind, the butterflies in your stomach, the questions running through your head. Would they like me? Would I like them? What if we have nothing to talk about? It was a bit of a gamble, but honestly, I was just looking to meet someone new. A couple of friends had set this up for me, and after seeing the guy's profile, I thought, why not? It could be fun, even if it was a little awkward at first. I'd agreed to meet at a small cafe in the city. It wasn't anything fancy, just a quiet, cozy spot that seemed perfect for a first meeting. As I stepped inside, I glanced around. The place was pretty busy for a Wednesday night, but I spotted a guy sitting alone near the window. He looked up when I walked in, and for a second, I thought I recognized him, but I brushed it off. I'd probably seen him around somewhere, or maybe his face was just one of those that looked familiar. I walked up to him, smiling, feeling that familiar surge of nervous energy. I asked if he was James, the guy I was supposed to meet, and he nodded with a small smile. Something about it felt off, but again, I pushed it aside. People are always nervous on dates. He stood up and pulled out the chair for me. That was sweet, I thought. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. I sat down, still trying to shake that weird feeling. I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't like he looked exactly like someone I knew, but there was something about his face, his features, his posture, even the way he held himself, that made me feel like I'd seen him 100 times before. We started talking, and that's when it got even weirder. I don't know how to explain it, but everything he said felt like something I would say. It wasn't just the tone or the style of speech. It was the content. He mentioned his favorite books, movies, and even some of the places he liked to visit, and it was like he had read my mind. He had the same taste in everything. He even laughed the same way I did when something genuinely amused him. At first, I thought maybe we just had a lot of common interests, but as the night went on, I started to feel more and more uncomfortable. At one point, he said something that threw me off completely. He mentioned a dream he'd had the night before, and the details were so similar to a dream I'd had just a few days ago. I almost thought he was messing with me. I could have sworn I had talked about it to a close friend, but I hadn't mentioned it to anyone else. It wasn't just the imagery or the concept of the dream. It was the exact same details. Same people, same setting, everything. I laughed it off nervously, asking him if he was being serious. But the more I looked at him, the more I started to wonder. There was something so familiar about him, but not in a way that made sense. It was like staring into a mirror, but seeing someone else's reflection. As we continued talking, I found myself almost mimicking his movements. If he adjusted his glasses, I'd adjust mine at the exact same time. If he took a sip of his drink, I would do the same. I didn't even notice it at first, but after a while, it started to feel like I was watching myself across the table. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, I started to get this horrible feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. I mean, who even behaves like that? Two people copying each other's movements? It was like we were in sync, but not in a cute, romantic way. It felt more like we were two in sync, like we were the same person. I shifted in my seat and tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. It was a date, for crying out loud. Dates are supposed to be weird and awkward, right? But then came the moment that sent my entire world spiraling. He mentioned a childhood memory. Now let me stop here and explain. It wasn't just any childhood memory. It was my childhood memory. Something from when I was 10 years old. Something I had never told anyone about. Something that had stayed locked in my mind for years. And he told me this memory as though he lived it himself. The words were almost identical to how I had described it to my best friend all those years ago. The exact moment I realized it wasn't a coincidence was when he started talking about a family vacation to the beach that I had taken when I was 14. He described the details, the smell of salt water in the air, the way the sand felt hot under my feet, the way my little brother had gotten lost for a few hours. I couldn't breathe. I had never told anyone that my brother had gotten lost that day. Not even my parents really remembered it. How could he know about that? I felt a cold sweat creeping up my neck, and my stomach churned. I put my drink down with a shaky hand and stared at him. He seemed completely normal, calm, collected, but the more he talked, the more it was like he was reading a script from my own life. The same thoughts, the same experiences, the same way of thinking. It wasn't just that we had a lot of common ground. It was that he was, in some twisted way, me. It was as if he had lived through my life, walked my path, and now here he was, sitting across from me like he was some kind of twisted version of myself. I tried to get up, tried to leave, but the way he looked at me, the way he seemed so familiar, was almost paralyzing. It wasn't even just his face anymore. It was everything about him. His gestures, his tone, the way he looked at me like he knew everything I had ever thought, felt, or done. It was suffocating. The worst part was that I wanted to believe it was just some weird coincidence, some glitch in the universe, but I couldn't. There were too many moments, too many instances where he said something that no one could have known unless they had lived through my life. I asked him about his childhood, trying to redirect the conversation, trying to get something, anything, that would separate him from me. But his story was the same as mine. He had the same hometown, the same school, the same friends. It wasn't possible. People don't have the same life, right? Especially not to this extent. The panic started to set in then. My thoughts were racing, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I losing my mind? Was I dreaming? Maybe I had just been reading too many weird Reddit threads and watching too many true crime documentaries. But no, this was real. This was happening. And the more I tried to pull away, the more I realized something even more terrifying. He didn't want me to leave. It was like he was afraid I would run, like he needed me to stay. Every time I made an excuse to get up, he would subtly, almost imperceptibly, convince me to stay a little longer. He mirrored my every move, like he was studying me, keeping me there for some reason I couldn't understand. That's when I started to feel the walls closing in. This wasn't just a weird date. This wasn't just a guy who looked a little too familiar. This was something far worse. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it in my bones. I don't know what happened after that. I remember standing up abruptly, feeling my hands shaking, my mind foggy. I can't even remember what I said as I walked away, but I remember him watching me go, still smiling that same smile that looked too much like mine own. I've been avoiding that cafe ever since. I never spoke to him again, and I never looked up his profile. I didn't want to know any more about him. I didn't want to confirm that what had happened was real. I just wanted to forget. But every now and then when I'm alone, I'll catch a glimpse of someone in a crowd or on the street, and for a split second, I'll see that face. And it's mine. I'm not really sure where to start with this, because it sounds insane, like something out of a bad thriller movie. But I swear what happened that night was real. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, a casual meetup with someone I've been talking to for a while, nothing more. But looking back, I can't help but feel like I walked into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So I guess I should start at the beginning. It was one of those random Tuesday nights. Nothing special. I've been chatting online with a guy named Mark for a few weeks. He seemed nice enough. Nothing extraordinary, just a decent guy. We'd exchanged texts, and he seemed funny, a bit sarcastic, but in that charming way that makes you feel like you're in on a private joke. So we decided to meet for dinner. Nothing too fancy, just a spot downtown that was supposed to have amazing Italian food. I was excited. Honestly, I'd been looking forward to this all week. We'd agreed to meet at 7 p.m., and I arrived a little early just to make sure I had time to find parking and not feel rushed. The restaurant was one of those dimly lit places, with soft music playing in the background and candles on every table. It had a cozy vibe to it. I walked in, gave my name to the hostess, and was led to our table. I could see the reservation was under Mark's name, so I felt a little relief. Always good to know you're not being stood up, right? I sat there for a few minutes, just scrolling on my phone, waiting. It wasn't unusual for him to be a little late. People are always rushing around after work, trying to make it to plans. But when I looked up and saw him walking in, I instantly felt this weird little wave of relief wash over me. He smiled, walked over, and we exchanged pleasantries. He was taller than I expected, wearing a button-up shirt, casually tucked into jeans. His smile was warm, genuine. He definitely looked more attractive in person than in his photos, and that always feels nice. The first few minutes were pretty normal. We talked about our jobs, random hobbies, a few lighthearted stories. I liked him. He had a way of making me feel at ease, like I could be myself. But as we got into the conversation, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything specific, not at first, just little things. He seemed to know an awful lot about me for someone I hadn't shared that much with. Little details, like where I went to college, some of my favorite books. I didn't think much of it at the time, because he could have just picked up on things from our text. Maybe he had a great memory, or maybe he stalked me a little on social media, which, honestly, I didn't care about. It's the age of the internet, and if you're meeting someone online, that's kind of just expected. But then we started talking about past relationships, and here's where it really started to get weird. He said something about an ex of mine, a very specific detail about them that I never shared with anyone, not even close friends. It was a detail so random that no one could have just guessed it. I froze for a second. My stomach did that weird twist. How could he know that? I never posted anything about it. I'd never mentioned it. My mind started running in circles. I asked him how he knew that, trying to laugh it off, but he just shrugged like it was no big deal. He told me he had a good memory and had been paying attention to the details. But I was unsettled. It wasn't just that he knew, it was the way he said it, like he was reading my thoughts. I tried to brush it off, but at that point, I really needed a bathroom break. The unease was starting to creep up, and I thought stepping away for a minute would help me clear my head. So I excused myself and went to the restroom. Now I know this is where things start to sound even more unbelievable, but just bear with me. When I walked back into the dining area, everything had changed. I walked through the small hallway leading back to the main area, expecting to see Mark sitting at the table, but it was empty. The table where we'd been sitting was completely vacant. No glass of wine, no half-eaten bread basket, nothing. Just the two chairs pushed back like no one had ever been there. It felt like I'd stepped into some sort of alternate reality. I stood there for a moment, blinking, thinking I was somehow confused. Maybe he went to the bathroom too, and I just missed him. But when I looked around the room, I noticed that no one at any of the other tables seemed to be looking at me. No one seemed to recognize that there had ever been a guy sitting at my table. I walked over to the hostess stand and asked if they'd seen my date. She looked at me blankly. "You were alone when you arrived," she said. "We didn't have anyone else with you." I was confused. "No, I came in with someone, Mark. We had a reservation under his name." She shook her head. "No, there's no reservation under that name, and I didn't see anyone come in with you." I was about to argue when another waitress nearby overheard and turned to me, a little puzzled. "You sure you came in with someone? We don't get a lot of reservations on Tuesdays, and I would have noticed." My mind was racing now. I told them I was certain, but they all insisted I came in alone. Something was off. My head was spinning. I started walking through the restaurant, asking different servers if they'd seen the guy I was with, and every single one of them looked at me like I was crazy. "Sorry, miss," they kept saying. "We didn't see anyone with you." I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I missed something. Maybe there had been a mix-up, and I was just misremembering. But no, the messages between Mark and me were still there. I'd only left the table for 5 minutes. It didn't make any sense. I walked back to the hostess stand, desperate now, asking if they could check security footage. I needed to see proof that I hadn't imagined the whole night. The hostess told me there were no cameras in the restaurant, just in the back, where they kept track of deliveries. I don't know what happened next. I couldn't even stay in the restaurant anymore. I had to leave. I just had to get out of there. My mind was racing, my pulse quickening. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. I thought maybe I blacked out or maybe I was being pranked, but nothing made sense. I hadn't been drinking. I hadn't taken anything. I was completely sober, and yet it felt like the whole evening had been erased. I didn't hear from Mark after that. I tried texting him, but he never responded. And the weirdest thing, there was no record of our reservation when I checked the restaurant's booking system online. Not even a trace. Now, whenever I go out to eat, I check my surroundings. I try to make sure I'm not in the same place, sitting at the same table, with that same feeling of dread creeping up my spine. I haven't tried to meet anyone new since that night. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to. It's been a while, but I still can't shake the feeling that maybe Mark didn't just vanish that night. Maybe he was never really there at all. I don't know what happened, but I do know one thing. The next time I go on a date, I'll be checking the exit before I even sit down. It all started with a blind date, as these things often do. A friend of a friend had set me up with a guy named Ryan. We'd exchanged a few texts, nothing too crazy, just small talk. But he seemed like a decent guy, and I was in the mood to meet someone new. So we decided to meet at a restaurant called La Carne. It was one of those places that not a lot of people know about, exclusive, kind of tucked away in a corner of the city. I'd heard about it from some foodie blogs, and they all said the same thing. The food was out of this world. So yeah, I was excited. I got there early, as usual, to avoid the awkwardness of walking in late. The place was small, dimly lit, with a minimalistic vibe. The tables were all spaced out just enough to make you feel like you were in your own little world. The whole thing had this quiet elegance, like you were about to experience something special. Ryan had texted me saying he was on his way, and I was just sitting there, sipping on some wine, checking my phone. When he walked in, I instantly recognized him from his pictures. He had that whole effortlessly cool vibe, dark hair, a beard that looked like it was professionally sculpted, and a shirt that screamed, "I know what I'm doing." He smiled when he saw me, and we exchanged pleasantries. He was attractive, confident, and seemed like someone you want to have dinner with. The waiter led us to our table, and we sat down. The place had this hushed energy, like everyone was whispering secrets to each other. It was exactly the kind of place that made you feel like you were part of something exclusive. Ryan immediately started talking about the menu, and he seemed so confident about the dishes. It was clear he was a regular. He recommended a few things, and we decided to go all in: one appetizer, two entrees, and a dessert to share. He seemed really into the whole fine dining experience, and honestly, I was enjoying myself too. The food was exquisite. I had never tasted anything like it. The flavors were so rich, the texture so delicate. It was like each bite was a little piece of heaven. We talked about everything: our jobs, our families, random stuff. He seemed nice, funny, and easy to talk to. The conversation flowed naturally, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the evening. I didn't have any doubts about him at that point. Sure, there were little things that seemed a bit off, but nothing that stood out as red flags. That is, until the main course came out. I'll never forget it. The dish was some sort of steak. Maybe it was wagyu. I don't even know. I'm not a huge steak person, but I figured when in Rome, right? I took a bite, and it was delicious. Like too delicious. The kind of meal where you close your eyes because it's that good. But as I was chewing, I noticed something. There was this little sliver of something weirdly out of place. A small, dark tattoo embedded in the meat. I couldn't quite place what it was at first, but when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was a tattoo of a rose. Simple, delicate. I remember thinking how strange it was to see a tattoo in my food. Maybe it was some weird garnish or decoration I hadn't noticed. But then I froze. The tattoo, it was too familiar. I'd seen it earlier that day, on a missing persons poster. It had been plastered on the wall of the corner store I passed before heading to the restaurant. The picture was of a young woman, probably in her 20s, with dark hair and a smile that looked like it belonged to someone who had just experienced the best day of their life. The name beneath it was Emily Monroe, and the poster had been up for about a week. I had glanced at it on my way in and hadn't thought much of it. But now, that tattoo on the steak, it was the exact same rose, same shading, same design, no doubt about it. I felt my heart race. I tried to swallow my food, but it felt like I couldn't. My throat was tight. I looked down at the plate again, and sure enough, the tattoo was still there. I thought maybe I was imagining things, so I took a closer look. It wasn't just some design that happened to look like a tattoo. No, it was her tattoo, the one from the poster. I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't. My mind was spinning. Was this some kind of sick joke? My hands were trembling, and I could feel the panic rising. I glanced up at Ryan, who was still eating like nothing was wrong, completely oblivious. He was chatting about something, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. I was too focused on the plate in front of me, the rose that seemed to mock me. What was going on? How could this be possible? I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid, but I couldn't just ignore it. I felt like I was about to lose my lunch. I excused myself from the table and quickly stood up, rushing to the bathroom. The whole time I was trying to keep it together, but my mind was in a panic spiral. I stared at myself in the mirror, trying to calm down, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew it was more than just a coincidence. When I returned to the table, I tried to act normal, but the sight of the steak with the tattoo still embedded in it was too much. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Ryan was still chatting away, but I could barely focus on what he was saying. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together. How did this happen? Was the restaurant involved in something twisted? Had they done something awful? And why had I never heard anything about it in the news? Surely, if someone was missing, it would have been all over the place. I couldn't stop thinking about the missing persons poster. Emily Monroe, her face, the rose tattoo, and the fact that this restaurant was known for serving the most exclusive, mysterious dishes which people raved about. Was I eating something I shouldn't have? Was I eating someone's, Remains? I wasn't even sure how to handle the situation anymore. My appetite was completely gone. I didn't even want to finish the meal, but I didn't want to make a scene either. I tried to smile and pretend everything was fine, but the thought of what I had just seen gnawed at me. As the night wore on, I couldn't stop my mind from spiraling. I excused myself once more and went to the hostess, asking if they knew anything about the missing person. The hostess seemed completely unfazed, like it was just a regular day. She told me she hadn't heard anything about it. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't stay in the restaurant any longer. I grabbed my things and told Ryan I wasn't feeling well. He looked confused, but he didn't press. I left the restaurant and immediately Googled the name of the missing person once I got outside. The first thing I saw was a news article that confirmed Emily Monroe had been reported missing for a week. But then came the really disturbing part. The article mentioned that she had been last seen at La Carne, the very restaurant I had just been at. I don't know what to believe anymore. I haven't eaten at a fancy restaurant since that night, and every time I think about it, I feel like I'm going to be sick. What really happened that night? Was I really eating someone's remains, or was it just a sick twist of fate? All I know is that something wasn't right at that restaurant, and I'm never going back. So, yeah, that's my story. You can call it a coincidence if you want, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget that tattoo. I still don't know if it was a nightmare or if I was losing my mind. All I can tell you is that it happened over and over again, and I haven't been the same since. I'll never look at a simple date the same way again. It all began with a blind date. I met this guy, Luke, on a dating app. We had talked for a few days. Nothing too deep, just surface-level stuff. But he seemed nice, charming, funny. He had that whole laid-back vibe, and we got along pretty well. We decided to meet for drinks at a bar called The Oak, a quiet little spot I passed by a million times but never actually went into. I figured it'd be a good place to keep things casual and relaxed. Just the kind of date I'd usually go for. When I showed up, the bar was small, cozy. The kind of place with dim lighting, wooden floors, and a low buzz of conversation in the background. Nothing too fancy, but definitely a place that made you feel comfortable, like it was the kind of place where regulars came to unwind after a long day. I grabbed a seat at the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and checked my phone. Luke had texted me that he was on his way, so I just had to wait a few minutes. When he walked in, I immediately recognized him from his pictures. Tall, dark hair, scruffy beard. He looked exactly like his photos. Nothing weird about it. We exchanged pleasantries, and it was easy to talk to him. We joked about silly things, like bad first date stories, awkward moments. The kind of stuff that even if you've heard it 100 times, it still makes you laugh. We sat down at a table toward the back of the bar, a quiet spot. He seemed nice, and we started talking about all sorts of things: work, music, movies. Nothing out of the ordinary. Honestly, it felt pretty good, like a normal, fun first date. But then things started to get strange. Luke excused himself to go to the bathroom. I was just sitting there, sipping my wine, scrolling through my phone. It wasn't anything exciting. But then he came back, and when he sat down, something fell off. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint at first, but the vibe in the air had shifted. Luke didn't smile like he had before. Instead, he looked at me with a strange intensity, like he was sizing me up. He didn't say anything at first, just stared. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't answer at first, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. It was unsettling. His expression was blank, almost like he wasn't really seeing me. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, too tight, and I pulled my hand back, instinctively, but he didn't let go. "Do you know what's going to happen?" he asked, his voice low. I froze. What was he talking about? Was he messing with me? I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel my heart rate pick up. Something about his tone wasn't right. It felt like there was something deeper going on, something I couldn't understand. But before I could say anything, everything went wrong. There was this sudden, deafening screech of tires, followed by a crash. The world around me felt like it was distorting. The lights flickered. I felt cold. Everything became blurry. It was like I was in some kind of nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. My heart was racing. My stomach dropped. And then, nothing. I woke up. I wasn't at the bar anymore. I was in my bed, sunlight streaming through the window. Everything felt too calm. I sat up, confused, my pulse still racing. What just happened? It had felt so real. But now, here I was in my bedroom like nothing had happened. I grabbed my phone and checked it. There was a message from Luke, asking if I was still up for tonight. He had mentioned the same bar, same time. I felt my stomach twist. Was it possible that it had all been a dream? It had felt so real. But then again, why would I get a message from him if I had only just woken up? I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just overthinking things. I'd had a weird dream. That's all. But when I went to meet him later that evening, things felt off again. As soon as I walked into the Oak, I got this unsettling sense of déjà vu. The bar was the same as it had been the night before. The same dim lighting, the same wooden floors, the same low murmur of conversations from the other tables. It all felt too familiar, too much like the night before. And then Luke walked in. At first, everything seemed fine. He looked the same. He was still smiling, but something was wrong, like I was seeing him through a fog. When we sat down, he didn't seem quite like himself. He was a little quieter. He looked at me with the same strange expression, and when he excused himself to go to the bathroom, I had this feeling, like something wasn't right. And then he came back. The moment he sat down, I knew. The same thing was happening again. His eyes had that same wild intensity. He didn't smile. He didn't even seem like Luke. He just stared at me, the silence between us heavy and uncomfortable. He reached across the table, grabbed my wrist, and asked, in that same low voice, "Do you know what's going to happen?" I didn't know what he meant, but before I could say anything, I heard it again. The screech of tires, the crash. The room around me warped, and that cold feeling washed over me. It was exactly the same as the night before, the same damn thing, and I couldn't stop it. I woke up. Back in my bed, back in the same morning, sunlight through the window. I was drenched in sweat. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't breathe. This wasn't right. I just lived the same day again, the same damn day. It was like I was trapped in some sick loop, forced to relive the same horrible date over and over. But no matter what I did, it always ended the same way. I went back to the bar. I sat with Luke. He went to the bathroom. He came back with that same weird stare. He grabbed my wrist and asked the same thing. "Do you know what's going to happen?" And then the crash, the cold, the distortion. Every time. I tried everything. I tried not going to the bar, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like I was stuck. I tried texting Luke that I wasn't feeling well, but the messages didn't send. I tried leaving the bar early, but it didn't matter. The same thing happened every time. The crash, the cold, the distortion. And then I woke up, back in my bed, starting the day all over again. I started losing track of time. Days bulled into one another. It was like I was in some kind of twisted version of Groundhog Day, except it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. Each time it happened, I tried to do something different. I tried to change the conversation, leave the bar early, but it didn't matter. Luke's grip on my wrist would always be too tight. He'd always ask the same thing, and I'd always hear the tires screeching and the crash. And then I'd wake up. It felt like I was going crazy. I couldn't tell if I was still dreaming or if I was trapped in some kind of sick game. I was losing my mind. I had no control over anything. I was stuck in this never-ending loop, living the same horrible date over and over. I don't know how many times it's been now. It's hard to tell. I don't know if I'm even awake right now or if this is just another repeat of the nightmare. I don't know if I'll ever escape. All I know is that I'm scared. I'm terrified I'll keep waking up in that bed in that same morning and having to relive it all again. I just want it to stop, but I don't know if it ever will. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I'm still trying to piece together the details of that night, but some things don't quite add up, no matter how much I try to rationalize it. I can't shake the feeling that something was wrong from the very beginning, and it only got worse the longer I stayed. It started like any other blind date. I met him, or at least, I thought I did on a dating app. His name was Sam, and his profile seemed pretty normal. He had a few pictures, one of him at the beach, another at a concert, and one with some friends. He looked, well, normal, I guess. There was nothing too unusual about him. The conversations we had before meeting were fine, funny, casual. We seemed to click. So we decided to meet at this little Italian restaurant that I'd never been to, but it had good reviews. Nothing special, just dinner. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a table near the back. The first thing I noticed was that he was wearing a mask. At first, I thought maybe he had some sort of medical condition or was just being a little quirky. It wasn't uncommon to see people wearing masks for various reasons, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. So I sat down smiling and we started talking like everything was normal. But yeah, there was something off about it. I couldn't place it at first, but his mask wasn't like any mask I'd ever seen before. It was smooth and black, kind of sleek, like something you'd wear to a masquerade ball or a fancy event, but it didn't have any decoration on it. It was just plain. His eyes were hidden, and the whole thing seemed almost too perfect. I didn't want to seem rude or make him uncomfortable, so I didn't bring it up, but there was this weird tension in the air, like we were both pretending things were normal when we both knew they weren't. He kept his head tilted slightly down, his voice muffled behind the mask, but still, we made small talk about work, about movies, about our lives. Everything felt fine, but that damn mask. And then came the first weird thing. When the waiter came to take our order, Sam didn't speak. He just pointed to the menu. I figured maybe he just didn't want to talk or he wasn't comfortable with the staff, so I didn't say anything. But when the waiter walked away, he didn't even look at me. He just stared at his glass of water, his hands folded in front of him. There was this silence that stretched on for what felt like way too long. So, I said, trying to fill the awkwardness, "Are you like really into masks or something?" He didn't answer. He just blinked a few times and then slowly nodded. It wasn't even like a regular nod. It was almost robotic. I laughed awkwardly, trying to make light of the situation. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the creeping unease that was starting to settle in the pit of my stomach. The conversation moved on, but it felt like I was talking to a stranger, not the guy I've been chatting with online. Something was off about his mannerisms. The way he moved was strange, stiff, like he was trying to mimic normal human behavior, but couldn't quite get it right. His gestures were too precise, too rehearsed, like he was trying really hard to seem like he belonged. And I could see his hands trembling slightly when he picked up his wine glass. It wasn't normal, but I didn't know what to do. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was shy. Maybe he had anxiety or something that made him act this way. So I pushed it aside and tried to focus on the food. The whole evening, Sam didn't once take off his mask. He kept it on, even while eating. At first, I thought that was a little strange. Who wears a mask while they're eating? But I didn't say anything. It was his choice, right? But after a while, I started to feel this overwhelming pressure to say something, to ask him why he wouldn't take it off. It was like I couldn't breathe, like something was suffocating me. It was so simple. Just take off the damn mask, I kept thinking. But I didn't. I kept talking, pretending everything was fine, even though I could feel the tension between us growing thicker. Finally, after we finished our meal, Sam set his fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and then looked at me. There was this strange pause. He didn't speak. He just stared at me through the mask, and I felt this sudden chill run down my spine. I don't know why, but something about the way he looked at me made it feel like I was in danger. It was like his eyes were piercing through the mask, through everything, and I could feel him sizing me up, analyzing me. I wasn't sure how much time had passed before he finally spoke. "I can take it off now, if you want," he said, his voice deep and raspy, like it was coming from behind a wall. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded because, at that point, it felt like I needed to see what was under the mask. I had to. I needed some kind of explanation for what was going on. Sam slowly reached up and with deliberate movements unlatched the mask. As he pulled it off, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like I'd imagined. It wasn't just a face that had been hidden. It was nothing. Underneath the mask, There was a shifting, hollow space. His face wasn't there. It was just a blank, shifting void, a deep black emptiness where a face should have been. It was like looking into a hole, but the hole wasn't still. It moved, constantly shifting, like something was trying to take shape but couldn't. It was like there was a constant ripple, a disturbing distortion, as if his face was struggling to form itself. I could feel my blood run cold. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The void, his face, just kept shifting. It felt like it was pulling me in, like it was trying to drag me into whatever was inside it. And then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't a natural smile. It wasn't even a real smile. It was like the void itself curled into something that resembled a grin, but it was unnatural, stretched too wide. I could feel my chest tighten, my breath coming in quick gasps. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that thing, at whatever it was that had once been Sam. Time stopped making sense. All I knew was that I had to get away. I couldn't stay there, not with whatever that thing was across from me. I don't remember how I got out of the restaurant. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that I ran. I didn't stop running until I was home, locked in my apartment, trembling. And here I am now, writing this down, trying to make sense of it. But the truth is, I don't think I can. I don't think I'll ever understand what happened that night. All I know is that I never went back to that restaurant, and I never reached out to Sam again. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel the weight of that void. It's like something's still watching me, something that doesn't have a face. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget the feeling of it staring at me across that table. I met Derek through a mutual friend. He seemed like a really good guy. Handsome, funny, easy to talk to. We hit it off almost immediately. He had this calm confidence about him, not too eager or nervous, just comfortable. Honestly, it felt like I'd known him for years. He had this kind of effortless charm that made you feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter what. We decided to grab drinks at a local dive bar, nothing fancy, just a place where we could relax and get to know each other better. The evening went perfectly. We talked about everything and nothing, getting lost in the conversation. I could tell he was genuinely interested in what I had to say, and he made me laugh constantly. The conversation flowed so naturally it felt like we'd been talking for hours, even though it had only been a couple of drinks. By the end of the night, he walked me to my car. He gave me this lingering hug, and I thought, wow, this guy might actually be a keeper. We exchanged numbers, and he promised to text me soon to set something up for next week. Everything felt right. When I got home, I felt that kind of warm buzz that only a great date can give you. I tossed my bag on the couch, kicked off my shoes, and pulled up my phone to check messages. That's when I saw it, an obituary notification. It was weird. I had the app that pulled up local news, and sometimes it would alert me to new articles. But this one was different. The headline caught my eye immediately. Derek Mitchell, 32, dies in car accident. The article had a picture of the guy I'd been out with earlier in the evening. My heart dropped into my stomach. The picture was the exact same as the one on his profile. He was smiling, just like he had when we were together. But the obituary was dated from 3 years ago. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be seeing things. Maybe it was a different Derek Mitchell. I tapped the link and skimmed through the article. It described a car accident that had taken place 3 years ago, and the photo of him matched the one from his dating profile. It was unmistakable. This was the same guy I just spent the evening with. I don't know what I was feeling at that moment. Shock, confusion, fear, maybe all three. My mind was racing. Could it be a coincidence? But the date of the obituary, the photo, the name, it didn't add up. What the hell was going on? I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, but then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek. Hey, I had a great time tonight. Let's do it again soon, yeah? My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it, trying to process it. I had to be dreaming, right? There was no way this could be real. I quickly scrolled back to the top of the obituary article, confirming the date, 3 years ago. I couldn't make sense of it. I wasn't sure what to do. Was I going insane? Was it some weird prank? I tried to shake it off, but the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. I ended up texting him back. You're still alive? His reply came almost instantly. Ha! What a strange question. Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? I didn't know how to respond. But before I could even think of what to type next, there was a knock at my door. I froze. I glanced at my phone. It was late, too late for anyone to be stopping by uninvited. And yet I couldn't ignore it. The knock came again, louder this time. I hesitated, but then I stood up and made my way to the door, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't know why, but I was terrified to open it. My mind was screaming at me to stay away, to lock the door and never look back. But curiosity got the best of me. I opened the door, and there he was, Derek. He was standing there, smiling like nothing was wrong, as if this wasn't the strangest, most unsettling thing that could ever happen. "What's up? I thought I'd come by," he said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. My stomach turned. How are you here?" My voice trembled despite myself. "I told you I'd text you soon," he said, stepping past me into the hallway. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." My blood ran cold. Was he messing with me? This wasn't funny anymore. I wanted to shut the door, to get away from him, but I couldn't. My legs felt like lead. "You should probably leave," I said, trying to stay calm, but it came out sounding weak, almost pleading. He didn't seem bothered. He just smiled again, that same unnerving, charming grin, and moved farther into the apartment. "It's a little late for that, don't you think? I'm already here." I backed up, my back hitting the wall as I felt this overwhelming sense of dread flooding through me. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't even process it all. I forced myself to say something, anything. "Hi, I read the obituary. It said you were dead." He blinked at me, then burst out laughing. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. "A little late for that, don't you think? But you're funny. I'll give you that." I just stood there, unable to move. I felt frozen, like my body had completely betrayed me. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it, and it was another text from Derek. "I told you I'd be around. I'm not going anywhere, babe." The words made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream to run, but I couldn't. Something about his presence was suffocating, like he was slowly closing in on me. "I'm not going anywhere," he repeated softly, stepping closer to me. I stumbled back, trying to get away from him. "No, you can't be here. You're dead. You." He cut me off, his eyes narrowing. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm right here, aren't I?" My phone buzzed again. I didn't even want to look, but I did. It was a photo this time of me, standing at the door, looking terrified. The caption read, "You should have known better than to try to run." I felt like I was suffocating. My entire body was shaking, and I couldn't even make a sound. I turned and ran, running past him and locking myself in my bedroom. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might break through my ribs. I pressed my back against the door, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone. I couldn't even look at it anymore. But when I dared to glance, I saw the last text he sent. "I'll never leave. You're mine now." I never saw him again that night. I didn't hear any more knocks or phone calls, but the fear hasn't gone away. I still get random messages from him, texts, pictures, even videos of me in my own house. But here's the worst part. I can't tell if I'm still dreaming. Sometimes I wonder if I'm losing my mind. Maybe none of this happened, and I've just been imagining it all. But I don't think I am, because just the other day, I was walking down the street, and I swear I saw him, smiling at me from across the road. And he hasn't stopped following me since. I don't know if I'll ever truly be able to explain what happened that night. Even now, every time I try to piece it together, it feels like I'm missing something, like there's a giant hole in my memory that I can't quite fill. I don't even know where to start, so I'll just dive right in, I guess. It all began on a pretty regular date. I met Erica through a dating app. She seemed cool, normal, and we had a few decent conversations before deciding to meet up for dinner. She wasn't exactly my type on paper, but there was something about her that drew me in. She had that confident vibe, like she knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. Plus, she was funny, and I'll admit I kind of needed that, especially after some of the other awkward dates I've been on. So we picked a nice place, a small cafe that I liked. The kind of place where the food's good, but it's still casual. When I saw her, she was already sitting at a table, scrolling through her phone. She was pretty, but there was something about her demeanor that I couldn't quite put my finger on. She looked at me as I approached, smiled, and stood up to greet me. She was tall, with striking red hair and a playful sparkle in her eye. We exchanged pleasantries, and I thought, okay, this could be fun. The date was going well at first. We chatted about movies, work, hobbies, typical stuff. But as the evening wore on, I started to feel strange. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It was subtle. I began to lose track of time. I kept forgetting the words I was about to say, like I had something on the tip of my tongue, but couldn't quite grasp it. I just assumed it was nerves. But then something happened that made my stomach drop. I looked at the menu and tried to decide what to order. My eyes scanned the options, but none of them seemed familiar. The names of the dishes didn't make sense to me. I wasn't even sure if I liked any of them. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't know if I'd even had a favorite dish. Hell, I couldn't even remember what kind of food I liked. I turned to Erica to ask her about the dishes, but before I could say anything, she spoke first, as if she knew exactly what I was thinking. "Are you okay? You seem a little off. Nervous?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking." "About what?" she asked, cocking her head. I don't know. I can't remember what I usually order," I replied, trying to laugh it off. Erica didn't laugh. Her face was unreadable, and that's when I realized that she wasn't just being polite. She was watching me intently, as if she was studying me. I shrugged it off and ordered something random, but the unease in my stomach only grew. As the conversation continued, my mind kept wandering, and not in a good way. I kept losing track of who I was, like I was slowly becoming someone else. When Erica talked about her childhood, her family, her hobbies, everything felt so distant, like I was listening to someone else's life, not my own. I found myself nodding along, agreeing with things I didn't even know about. It was as if her life was starting to bleed into mine. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were talking about something trivial, whether or not pineapple belonged on pizza, something dumb, and I stopped mid-sentence. My mind went completely blank. I couldn't remember my own name. I sat there frozen. My heart raced. I tried to think, but there was nothing. Not a single shred of recognition. No name, no history, nothing. Who was I? I glanced down at my hands, trying to ground myself, but even they felt foreign. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to ask Erica who I was, but the words wouldn't come out. It wasn't just that I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember my past, my job, where I lived. My entire identity was gone, like it had been wiped away. It was like waking up in someone else's life and having no idea how you got there. I looked at Erica. Her smile was still there, but it had a strange, almost knowing quality to it. She looked pleased. I wasn't sure why, but I felt like she was waiting for something. "What's wrong?" she asked softly, leaning in. Her voice was soothing, too soothing. "You look like you're having a moment." I opened my mouth to speak, but I couldn't find the words. I wanted to tell her what was happening, but I didn't even know what was happening. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was being sucked into a void. "Do you need to go to the bathroom?" she asked, her voice low and calm. I nodded mechanically, desperate to get away from her, to get away from the strange feeling that was suffocating me. I stood up, but I felt like my legs were made of rubber. My head was spinning. I stumbled to the bathroom, hoping that splashing cold water on my face would snap me out of whatever this was. I stared into the mirror, trying to make sense of it all, but the face in the reflection was unfamiliar too. It was mine, but it wasn't. The eyes were mine, but they looked different, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there. I had to leave. I turned and rushed out of the bathroom, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I saw Erica standing at the entrance of the bathroom waiting for me. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, almost as if she was looking at a different version of me. It made my blood run cold. "I'm going to get going," I said, my voice shaking. I don't feel well. Erica's eyes flickered up to meet mine, and for a split second, her expression changed. There was a flicker of something, something dark, something possessive. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared, and she smiled that same too perfect smile. You don't need to leave, she said, her tone smooth, reassuring. I'll walk you home. I shook my head, my heart pounding in my chest. No, I'm fine. I just need some time alone. I turned, but she stepped in front of me, blocking my way. You don't want to go home alone, she said softly, almost as if she was coaxing a child. It's not safe. I wanted to push past her, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was losing myself again, and she was the one holding me here, keeping me tethered to something I couldn't understand. I reached for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. But when I looked down, the contact list was empty. There were no recent texts, no calls, nothing. Just a blank screen. My heart dropped. Why are you doing this? I asked, barely able to choke out the words. Erica didn't respond at first. She just stepped closer to me, her eyes softening as if she were trying to comfort me. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that she wasn't comforting me at all. She was taking over. I couldn't think straight anymore. My thoughts felt like they were slipping through my fingers like sand. Who was I? Why couldn't I remember anything? Was I even the same person anymore? You're confused, she said, reaching out to touch my arm, but it'll all make sense soon. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there and let her pull me deeper into whatever web she had spun. It felt like hours passed, though I'm sure it was only a few minutes. She kept talking, her words a steady stream, her presence wrapping around me like a thick fog, blurring everything I once knew. I don't even know when it happened, but eventually I realized I was no longer in control of my own life. It was hers now. I was just a passenger in my own body, watching as she took over. And the worst part, I couldn't stop her. I didn't know how. I don't know how I got home that night. I don't remember how I ended up back in my apartment. But the last thing I remember clearly is Erica's voice in my ear, whispering, "You're mine now. You always have been." The next day, I woke up, and it was like everything was normal again. For a second, I felt like I could breathe. But then, as I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw her. I don't know what's happening, but I know one thing. I'm not me anymore. I'm becoming someone else, and I don't know how to stop it. I don't know how long I've been trapped in this strange, twisted version of my own life. Days blur together, and I feel like I'm walking through someone else's story, but I can't remember how it's supposed to go. Every time I look at myself in the mirror, it's her face staring back. Not mine, her eyes, her smile. She's slowly taking over everything. It's like I'm losing pieces of myself with each passing moment. When I try to remember who I really am, it's like trying to grasp smoke. It slips right through my fingers. The more I try to fight it, the more it feels like she's controlling everything. My thoughts, my actions, even the way I speak. The worst part is that I'm starting to forget the things that used to matter to me, the things that used to define who I was. My old hobbies, they don't make sense anymore. My friends, I don't even know where to find them. And when I check my phone, the contacts are all gone. It's like she's erased everything, piece by piece, until all that's left is her wearing my face. I'm trying to get away, trying to run from it, but it's like the walls are closing in. Erica is everywhere. Her voice, her laugh, the way she looks at me. It's as though she's become a part of me, slipping deeper into my skin, like she was always meant to be here. Last night, I tried to call someone, anyone, but when I dialed the number, I realized something. There was no one left to call. Everyone I thought I knew, every memory I thought I had is fading. And the only name left in my phone, the only contact left, is hers. I've started to notice it more now. Those little things that she does that aren't me. Her laugh, her way of walking, her constant presence in everything I do. It's getting harder to distinguish where I end and she begins. And the longer I stay in this life, the more I realize I'm not going to get out of this. She's not just taking my life. She's becoming me. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. I don't even know if I still want to. I just hope that one day when it's all done, someone will remember who I really was. But it's getting harder to remember myself. And I think I might just be gone. The last thing I saw in the mirror was her smile, and it was wide, full of satisfaction, because Erica is winning. And soon, I'll be nothing more than a ghost in my own life. I met Alex. He seemed pretty normal in the messages, down to earth, witty, a bit sarcastic. We decided to meet at a small cafe downtown, the kind with candles on the tables and soft jazz playing in the background. I thought it would be a casual, no pressure kind of night. But from the moment I sat down across from him, something felt off. Alex was sitting unnaturally still, like he was waiting for someone to cue him. He had this weird stiff posture, like he was afraid to move too much. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous. I know I get nervous on dates, and sometimes that makes me feel like I'm stiff as a board too. But this was different. It wasn't just nervous energy. It was like he wasn't comfortable in his own body. When he spoke, it was like his words were just a little too rehearsed, his voice a bit too flat. There was no warmth, no spark in his tone. It was like he was reading lines from a script, and his eyes were completely blank. No expression, no life. He'd smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Every movement felt calculated to control. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe he was just a little shy, I told myself. Some people are like that on a first date, right? But the longer we talked, the more unsettling it became. He didn't seem to react to things the way normal people do. If I told a joke, he'd smile and nod like he'd heard it before, but there was no real laughter, no spark of recognition. If I told him something personal, like a story from my childhood or a memory that made me laugh, he'd tilt his head slightly, as if processing it, but the response always felt rehearsed, as though it had been programmed in. At one point, I reached out to grab my drink, and I saw something strange. His sleeve, his left arm, had shifted slightly when he moved, and under the fabric, I could see the faintest glimmer of something shiny. I thought I imagined it at first, but then it happened again, the way his arm jerked ever so slightly when he adjusted his sleeve. It looked unnatural, like something was pulling at it from beneath. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Every time he moved, it was just wrong. I watched his hands, stiff and robotic, carefully picking up his cup, moving it with mechanical precision. When he set it down, there was no fluidity in the action. It was like someone had taken the most basic movements of a human and turned them into a strict, predictable sequence. Every move was too perfect, too calculated. I was starting to get uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. Maybe it was a medical condition, or maybe he was just socially awkward. But then I saw it. I had leaned forward to take a sip of my drink, and when I glanced up, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. It was barely noticeable, but it sent a chill down my spine. There, attached to his back, were two thin, almost invisible strings. They were faint, almost blending into the shadows of the room, but I saw them clearly enough to know what they were. They were attached to his shoulders, pulling him slightly upright in an unnatural way. The strings weren't tied to his body like clothes, but connected to something hidden behind him, something controlling him. My stomach twisted in that moment. My mind raced. What the hell was happening? He was still talking, still smiling that weird, stiff smile, but my brain couldn't focus on anything but those strings. They weren't supposed to be there. People don't have strings attached to their bodies. No one moves like that. It was like he was being controlled, like someone was pulling the strings behind the curtain, making him say the right things at the right times, moving him like a puppet on a string. I had to be imagining it, right? This kind of thing doesn't happen in real life. Maybe I was just overthinking. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe I was just misinterpreting what I saw. But the more I stared, the more I realized this wasn't a coincidence. I needed to test it. I laughed at something he said, trying to gauge his reaction. When I did, his head tilted ever so slightly, and I could have sworn that the angle was too precise, too mechanical. It was like he didn't understand humor at all. The strings shifted, pulling his body just slightly, his posture stiffening even more as if to reinforce his rigid, unnatural demeanor. I wasn't imagining it. He was being controlled. The strings, the lack of genuine emotion, it was all starting to make sense. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't just leave. That would be rude, and I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. But I also didn't want to stick around to see what else might be happening. This was becoming something else entirely. This wasn't a blind date. It was something darker. I glanced around the cafe, hoping to see someone else who might notice what was going on. But no one seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. People were going about their business, sipping coffee, chatting, laughing. The world around us was completely normal, completely unaware of the puppet show happening right in front of them. That's when I started to panic. I needed answers. Fast. I stood up quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom." Alex nodded stiffly, his head jerking in a way that made my blood run cold. It was like he wasn't really thinking about it. Like the movement was automatic. I tried to get up as casually as possible, but my mind was racing. What the hell was happening? Who was controlling him? Why was he here? Why was I here? I rushed to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm myself down, but it wasn't helping. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see, something I didn't understand. When I finally came out of the bathroom, I steeled myself. I had to go back to the table, had to make sure this wasn't some weird prank or misunderstanding. I needed to know if I was imagining things. But when I walked back to the table, I froze. The seat was empty. Alex was gone. I stood there for a moment, blinking in confusion. Had he gone somewhere? Did he leave? I scanned the room, but there was no sign of him. The cafe was quiet, the same as before, but now it felt wrong, like I had just stepped into a different reality. I approached the server, trying to keep my voice steady. "Excuse me, did anyone see where my date went?" The server looked up at me with a blank expression. "Date? I'm sorry, ma'am, but you were sitting alone when we cleared the table. No one else was here." I felt my stomach drop to my feet. I'd been sitting with him. I'd been talking to him. I knew it. I could still feel the strange, rigid energy in the air, his stiff movements, his empty gaze. I wasn't crazy, but now there was no trace of him. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I wasn't alone. I was sitting with someone." The server shrugged, clearly confused. "No one was here but you, ma'am. Are you sure you didn't come alone?" My heart raced in panic as I walked out of the cafe, my mind reeling. There was no way I had imagined it. The strings, the stiffness, the feeling of being watched, controlled. I knew what I saw. I walked into the street, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine, but I couldn't. I had to know who or what was pulling the strings behind this bizarre, twisted date. And I was sure of one thing. This wasn't the last time I'd be seeing Alex, or whatever he was now, because someone or something was controlling him, and I was trapped in the strings of their game. I'll be honest, I'm still trying to figure out how I ended up in that situation. I mean, I thought it was gonna be just another normal blind date. Nothing special, just a casual meetup. But the whole night, it turned into something else, something I wish I could forget. I don't even know where to start, but I guess it all began when my friend Emma set me up. I was a little hesitant at first. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in dating. Honestly, I was kind of tired of the whole swiping left and right thing. But Emma said her coworker had this friend named Mark, and he sounded perfect. She showed me a couple of his photos. He was decent looking, looked normal enough, the kind of guy I'd normally go for. So we agreed to meet at this coffee shop downtown. Nothing too fancy, nothing that would make me feel like I had to put on some weird extra good face. You know how it is. First dates are nerve-wracking, even if you act cool about it. But this one, it didn't start off that bad. I got there first, like always. I was sitting at a small table by the window, scrolling through my phone, trying to keep myself distracted, not really paying attention to the door. Then, out of nowhere, I saw him, Mark. At first glance, he seemed normal. Tall, about my height, maybe a little more. Dark hair, a little scruff. He was wearing a plaid shirt and jeans, totally casual, just like me. He looked around the cafe before he spotted me. That was when I first noticed something odd. He didn't smile right away. It was almost like he didn't know how to smile. Or maybe it wasn't that, but he did this weird little twitch when he saw me, like his face was trying to adjust. I thought, okay, maybe he's just nervous. But when he walked toward me, his movements were stiff. Like really stiff. Not the kind of stiff where someone's anxious about their first date, but almost like he was trying to control the way he moved. His steps were measured, precise. No casual swing of the arms, no little fidgeting. Just control, almost robotic. He sat down across from me, and I immediately noticed that his posture was too rigid. His back was straight, almost to the point of being uncomfortable. I don't know if it was just me, but it felt like he was trying way too hard to appear calm. We exchanged pleasantries, the usual small talk, but even his voice sounded off. It was smooth, too smooth, like it was rehearsed. No stutter, no hesitation, like he was following a script. The words came out perfectly, but they didn't feel real. At first, I figured it was just me overthinking. Maybe he was nervous like everyone else on a first date. I mean, people act weird sometimes, right? But the longer I sat there, the more uncomfortable I started to feel. It was like there was something wrong with him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't, I don't know, normal. I decided to focus on my drink for a bit. Took a sip of my iced coffee to distract myself. That's when I saw it. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on the table, but his fingers twitched. At first, I thought maybe it was just him tapping them lightly, like a nervous habit. But then it happened again. His fingers jerked upward and froze in place like someone had just pulled the plug on him. It was too stiff, too sudden, like someone had just yanked him by invisible strings. I told myself to chill. Maybe he was just a little weird. Some people have strange habits, right? But something kept nagging at me, something in the back of my mind. So I kept watching, and that's when I noticed it. The strings. I almost didn't believe my eyes. I couldn't have been seeing what I thought I was seeing. But there, barely visible against the dim light in the cafe, I saw them. Thin, almost invisible strings attached to his wrists. At first, I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light, but no, they were real. Strings. They stretched down from the sleeves of his shirt, almost like they were attached to his limbs. And when he moved, it was like his movements were being controlled by someone or something on the other end of those strings. It was like I was watching a puppet. My heart started pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? Was I imagining this? I had to have been. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was the lighting, maybe. But no, I knew what I saw. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I wasn't about to scream or run out of the cafe, but I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. I needed to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, so I tried to act normal, keep the conversation going, but every time I looked at him, I couldn't stop staring at the strings. He seemed oblivious to the fact that I had noticed anything. His gaze never wavered from me. His hands remained stiff on the table, and the more I tried to focus on anything else, the more I saw those damn strings pulling at him. He didn't even seem like he was in control of his own body anymore. It was like his every move was being dictated by someone behind the scenes. I couldn't understand it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he wasn't acting nervous. He wasn't even acting at all. He was just being moved. Then, out of nowhere, something else happened that made my blood run cold. He didn't blink at all. I mean, sure, people forget to blink sometimes, but this wasn't like that. His eyes were locked onto mine, and his lids stayed open, staring, and his pupils didn't seem to focus. They were almost like glass, vacant, lifeless. It was like he wasn't even aware that he was sitting across from me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just nervous. He wasn't just a weird guy on a date. He was a puppet, and something was controlling him from the shadows. I felt sick. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want to make a scene. What if he was normal? What if I was just freaking out for no reason? But the more I watched him, the more I realized I couldn't ignore what was right in front of me. I needed to get out of there. I needed to leave, but I couldn't just walk away without saying something. So I excused myself to the bathroom, thinking maybe I could clear my head. But by the time I got back, I was starting to feel dizzy. I wasn't sure if it was just my mind racing or if it was something else. Maybe I had eaten something weird. Maybe the whole thing was just too much. But when I stepped back to the table, I froze. Mark wasn't there. The chair was empty. I stood there, not sure what to do. Did he leave? Did I miss him getting up? Was I crazy? I glanced around the cafe, but no one seemed to notice anything. The place was buzzing with chatter, people going about their business like nothing was wrong. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to just run out of there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe this was some kind of sick joke. Maybe I wasn't supposed to see what I saw. I turned back to the server, trying to act casual. Hey, did someone leave? The server looked up at me, confused. No. You've been here alone the whole time. My stomach dropped. I could barely breathe. What the hell was going on? Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined it all? But no, I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't be sure of anything, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back there. Not for another date. Not for anything. Because whatever had happened, whatever had been controlling him was still out there, and I had no intention of finding out what came next. The last thing I remember is looking at the empty chair, and then realizing I was the one who had become part of the show. I should have known the moment I walked into that restaurant that something was off. I mean, how could I not? The whole atmosphere just felt wrong. Too quiet, too pristine. Almost like the place was trying too hard to look perfect. But then again, I'm always a bit of a skeptic when it comes to blind dates, and maybe I was just projecting. I'd met Sarah through a mutual friend of a friend, and the setup seemed promising enough. She had a great smile in her profile picture, and from our text conversations, she seemed funny and intelligent. I was looking forward to a casual dinner, hoping we could at least have some good conversation and a nice meal. When she arrived, I immediately noticed something that I hadn't expected. She was way more attractive than her photos. She had this natural elegance about her, a soft, inviting vibe that made me feel comfortable right away. She smiled at me as I stood up to greet her, and I could tell she was nervous, but trying not to show it. I smiled back, thinking, hey, this is going well. We sat down at our table, and the host brought over a bottle of wine that we both agreed on. But the first thing I noticed that was weird was how Sarah kept glancing to the side. At first, I thought she was just checking out the menu or maybe someone across the room, but she kept doing it. Every few seconds, her eyes would dart to the seat next to hers, almost like she was waiting for someone to show up. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just looking around, or maybe I was being too paranoid. But then something else happened that made my stomach drop. She spoke. But not to me. She said something low, like she was talking to someone else, but there was no one sitting next to her. I leaned in slightly, thinking I'd misheard. You're right, she muttered, her voice soft and strange. I'll make sure to order the fish for you. I froze. Was she talking to someone else? I glanced at the empty chair beside her, but it was empty, just like I thought. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe she was talking to herself, I thought. People do that when they're nervous, right? But it wasn't like she was having the conversation. It was as if she was acknowledging someone there in the room. The more I watched her, the weirder it became. She would smile at the empty chair, as though there was someone there who had made a joke or said something witty. At first, I thought it might just be nerves. People act a little strange on dates, and maybe she was just trying to ease her anxiety by talking to an imaginary friend or something. But the longer it went on, the more it started to bother me. She would tilt her head like she was listening to something I couldn't hear, then laugh softly to herself. It was starting to get uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I should say something or just brush it off, but it was definitely distracting. My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe she was a bit off, or maybe this was some kind of social experiment. Either way, I had to know what was going on. I leaned back in my chair and decided to ask her about it, hoping it wasn't something weird I'd regret. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. Are you talking to someone? Or, I trailed off, trying to find the right words. She looked at me, her eyes widening for a moment, and then she smiled that perfect, slightly unsettling smile. Don't be rude, she said. They're sitting right next to you. The blood in my veins ran cold. What? I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to say. My eyes flicked over to the empty chair again, and my throat went dry. She could be serious, right? There was nothing there. No person, no shadow, no sign of anyone at all. Just the empty seat that I had already noticed earlier, sitting quietly and undisturbed. Who? I asked, my voice coming out rough, trying to hide the rising panic in my chest. Who's sitting there? She just smiled again, this time wider, more relaxed. You're being rude now, she said softly. Please don't embarrass me. They're right there. It's bad manners to ignore them. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I just get up and leave? Should I ask if she was okay? My head was spinning, but I felt trapped. The last thing I wanted to do was make a scene at a nice restaurant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong here. I glanced around the restaurant, hoping someone else would give me a clue, like maybe a waiter or someone else who might notice how weird this was. But everyone was too busy, too absorbed in their own meals, and the dim lighting made it hard to get a good sense of what was going on around us. I turned back to her, but when I did, her gaze had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at the empty chair beside her, like she was having a full-on conversation with someone there. I didn't know what was happening, but I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. Now, I had to get out of there. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a date. This wasn't right. But before I could stand up, the waiter came by, carrying our food. He placed the plates down, giving me a polite smile, then turned to Sarah. She nodded at him, then turned back to me. You should eat, she said, her voice now almost sweet, too sweet. We don't want to upset them. I had had enough. I stood up quickly, but she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me back down into the chair. No, no, she said, her voice turning a bit more frantic now. Don't you understand? They don't like it when people run. You can't leave. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart was pounding in my ears. This was insane. What was happening? I yanked my wrist out of her grasp and stood again, this time not looking back. I turned and walked quickly toward the door, my hands shaking. I didn't know if she was following me or if there was anyone else in the restaurant watching. I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to get out. As I pushed through the door and into the cold night air, I looked back one last time. Through the window, I saw Sarah still sitting at the table, her back straight, hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes fixed on the empty chair. She was smiling again, but this time her smile was different. It wasn't the charming, easy smile I had seen earlier. It was darker, almost knowing, as though she knew exactly what I had just seen. The feeling that washed over me as I walked away was something I'll never forget. It was as if I had just escaped some kind of trap, but I wasn't sure what kind. I didn't know if she had been messing with me, if I had just witnessed something that wasn't supposed to be seen, or if I had lost my mind. All I knew was that I wasn't going back to that restaurant, and I wasn't going back to see Sarah either. I don't know if she's still out there, still sitting at that table, waiting for someone to notice the empty chair beside her. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget the way she smiled when I left, because I could have sworn, just for a second, that the empty chair wasn't empty anymore. I'd like to tell you this was one of those things where everything seemed perfectly normal at first, but it wasn't. From the moment I stepped into that dimly lit bar, I knew something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I'd never been on a blind date before, so maybe this was just how things worked. I had set myself up for an evening of awkwardness, sure, but nothing could have prepared me for the absolute nightmare I was about to live through. It started when I walked in. I'd been stood up before, but I'd never had a situation where I showed up to a place and the person was already there, waiting for me. She was sitting at a small table tucked away in the back corner of the room, her back to the wall, like she knew I would come in. She wasn't at all what I was expecting. The photo I'd been sent was of someone with short blonde hair, a big smile, and a sweet vibe, someone maybe in her late 20s. But this woman sitting at the table, she looked older. She had long black hair and wore a sharp red dress that didn't match the chill in the air. Her expression was intense, almost too intense, as she looked right at me as soon as I walked in. I paused for a moment. Maybe I was being paranoid, but she knew it was me. How? I didn't know this person. I wasn't sure if I should just turn around and leave, but I'd already told my friend I'd meet her, and I didn't want to look like a total weirdo. She smiled, not a friendly smile, not a warm one, more like a smirk, a half grin, like she knew a secret that I didn't. "You're late," she said, her voice cool, but oddly calm. "But I'm sure you have your reasons." I froze. My blood ran cold. I had no idea who she was. I hadn't told anyone I was coming to this bar tonight. The only reason I knew I was meeting someone was that my friend had sent me a message saying they set it up. A blind date. Funny how it was supposed to be a surprise. But I didn't expect this. I forced myself to walk over, feeling like my legs were made of lead. Something in the back of my mind told me to turn around and get out of there, but I didn't. I sat down. "Sorry, I started, but my voice caught in my throat. How was I supposed to start a conversation with someone I didn't know? She interrupted me before I could say anything else. "I know what you're going to say. Sorry, I didn't know who you were. This is a mistake." I blinked at her. "What?" She smiled again, but this time the smile didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't know I was going to be your date tonight, did you? But I know everything about you." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide the panic creeping up inside me. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the table, and for the first time, I saw her eyes, cold, calculating, but somehow familiar. Like I had seen that gaze before, but couldn't place where. "I know about your ex, Jessica. How she left you for that guy from your college chemistry class. I know that you still keep her number in your phone, hoping she'll call. I know you visit her Facebook page every night at 2 a.m., even though you'll never admit it to anyone. I know how you've never really gotten over her, and you still think about her every single day. I also know that you hate pineapple on pizza, but you always order it when you're by yourself. I know you like to play video games to drown out the noise in your head after a long day at work, but you'll never tell anyone that. And I know your darkest secret, how you almost got caught stealing from your old job last year, but you managed to cover it up. And then there's the thing you're still lying to yourself about, that one thing you'll never admit to anyone, not even your best friend." I felt the blood drain from my face. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I had no idea how she knew all of that. The only people who knew anything about those things were my ex, my best friend, and me, and I never talked about them. The feeling of unease spread through my chest, like I was being smothered by a thick, heavy blanket. I suddenly couldn't breathe right. This was wrong. This whole thing, this date, whatever this was all wrong. I tried to stand up, but my body felt numb, like I couldn't move. "You can't leave," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've already agreed to this. And trust me, it's too late to back out now." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. My body was frozen, like someone had pressed the pause button on my life. "Who are you?" I managed to rasp out. "What the hell is going on?" She smiled again, this time almost sympathetically. "You really don't remember, do you? I thought you'd forget, but here we are." She paused, as though she were savoring the moment. "I'm the one who's been pulling all the strings. You think you've been living your life, making your own choices, but it's all been a game. And now you're part of the show." I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My hands started shaking, and I couldn't look away from her piercing gaze. I knew I should have left earlier, when the first red flag went up. But now it was like something was holding me in place, like I was stuck in this nightmare and couldn't wake up. I glanced around the room. It was nearly empty, just a few people scattered at tables, but no one was looking our way. It felt like the whole restaurant had faded into the background, like we were in some kind of bubble that no one else could see. "What do you mean, a game?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand." She tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "You'll find out soon enough. But the thing is, you're already part of it. All the choices you thought you made on your own, they were never yours to make. They were always mine. And now you're in this, whether you like it or not." I felt the weight of her words hit me. I wanted to scream, to run, to get up and throw something across the room, but my body wouldn't respond. I couldn't get away from her. It was like I was in some twisted version of my own life, and every decision had been made for me. Every move I made had already been planned out. I don't know how long we sat there in silence, her gaze never leaving mine. I kept trying to move to escape, but I couldn't. And then it hit me. I couldn't remember how I'd even gotten to this place. I couldn't remember how I'd ended up here, sitting across from a woman who seemed to know everything about me, everything. I couldn't remember anything beyond the last few months. It was all slipping away. I looked around the room again, and this time I saw something. A small door, almost hidden behind a thick velvet curtain. The door was slightly ajar, and there was something glowing on the other side. "Where does that door go?" I whispered, my voice almost shaking. She chuckled softly. "That's where all the answers are, if you're brave enough to find them." And then, without warning, my legs started moving again. It wasn't me, at least not entirely. I felt like my body was under someone else's control as I stood up, walked over to the door, and opened it. The last thing I saw before the door closed behind me was her smile. It was the last thing I ever saw.